the truth hurts, so you about to feel pain, and I gotta do work, God said I gotta do work, cause it's off with the name, savage truth, it's the savage truth, the savage truth, the savage.
Welcome back to the Savage Truth Network. I'm your host, Roy Dockery, and this is the second to last Leadership Lab session. What I want to talk about today is a pet peeve of mine when it comes to people in management or in leadership. And it's the difference between when you delegate something or when you defer to someone as a leader, right? So it's like delegation versus deferring. So what I want to do first is I want to define some tasks to make, some words to make sure we're on the same page. Definitions matter, right? So delegate, like the definition I'm referring to is when you entrust a task or responsibility to another person, and normally someone who's less senior than you, right? So that's delegation. That's like I'm entrusting another person. And then a lot of times when you talk about delegates, when you think about like representatives, that person is also kind of endowed with my authority in that delegation to represent me as the person completing that task or responsibility, right? So that's delegation. Deferring, right? To defer to somebody means that you're agreeing to follow their decision, right? And depending on who you are, you may be deferring but not delegating, which means you're giving somebody the responsibility to resolve a problem, to handle a task or responsibility, but they don't really have the authority to do so. And you haven't rightfully delegated any authority to them in public, right? And then when it comes to taking responsibility for the failure, you normally defer that to someone else, right? Because if someone's acting on my behalf, right, that's like me giving someone power of attorney to sign my name. That's still my responsibility. This person is my legal delegate or representative, right? The people that we elect into office are called delegates, right? They're supposed to represent constituents. But if you are my delegate, that means you are operating under my power. That means I am responsible for what you're doing. So leaders should be delegating, right? We should be empowering people. We should be entrusting them, but we should be giving them basically our name to carry. And so I would tell my employees all the time, and I still do, when you're in a meeting and I'm not there, that means you represent me. So that means my employees need to understand how I think. They need to understand how I process things, information, right? Like my goals, my objectives. They need to understand that because when they're in a meeting representing leadership from my team, they are also representing me. And so that means any decision that they make, any information that they provide, the opinions that they give, ultimately have to align or I have to agree with that person, right? Which means I have to know my people well enough to delegate something to them so that I can trust to know that they won't go represent an opinion that I would ultimately have to disagree with. That if I send my delegates to a meeting, they're not going to represent an idea, a philosophy, an outcome, or an output that I would be completely opposed to. Right. And so that requires the alignment, and all the other 11 sessions that we've talked about should have you at that point where your employees trust you. You've spent time with them. You're showing love to them individually. You're getting to know them and helping them to develop themselves. So they should also know you very well, that when you delegate them to go handle something on your behalf, they don't misrepresent your opinion, they don't misrepresent your interests, and they don't do things that are contradictory to your overall objectives because you're in alignment. But sometimes what we see with leaders is we see this tendency to defer to, right? And a lot of this, the deferral, right? The deferring shows up when it's time to take responsibility, which is what I talked about in the last one. Because when it's time to take responsibility as a leader, instead of taking responsibility because I delegated someone to accomplish something, I'm now deferring to that person and saying, like, hey, well, John, why is this not done yet? Like someone's asking me for a deliverable, someone's asking me for an output. And instead of me owning that result and then going to my delegates and collecting that information, I start deferring to that individual as if this outcome was wholly their decision. And even if it was, I was the one that delegated them and entrusted them with the authority. So I should be owning the result because I'm ultimately the person responsible. But some leaders do not do that. And I would say those people are not very good leaders. A lot of managers do that. They like to defer to. right? So they're going to follow someone else's direction or someone else's. And this comes across when, and you'll hear it in the common things when people are like, well, what's going on with this project? And it's like, well, let me, I was expecting it by now. Let me go check with Sally to see why that's late. Let me go check with John to see why that's late. You're deferring in that moment because what you're saying is that there was an expectation that should have been met and it's not being met. As a leader, you should own that and say, you know what? We were supposed to have that done. Which is me and my collective delegation, right? Because everyone knows, like if I'm the executive, you're the leader, everyone knows you're not doing the reports, you're not executing the specific work. So they know that there are other people supporting you. But when you preface it as we, like, you know what, we were supposed to have that done next week. Let me go look into it. Let me check with my team and I'll come back to you. But if you immediately defer to like, oh, I assigned that to John and he didn't get it done, let me go figure out why he's not done. That means you deferred responsibility. That means you're not owning it. That means that you're treating that person as an untrusted source and that it was entirely their decision or their responsibility, right, to follow up or to execute. So, and in a lot of those cases, come to find out, John already sent it to you, but you didn't see the email, but you've already thrown John under the bus. And now you get to show up with like, yeah, I checked with John. Here it is. Sorry that that's late. When it wasn't late, John probably turned it in on time. And then you could collectively take that we example, right? Like I have these examples every day where we can blame an individual, we can blame a group, and it's not like we either succeed together when I talked about giving credit and take responsibility, or we will fail together. But you never, as a leader, should defer your responsibility and start trying to gaslight or highlight individuals that are not doing their job. Because if that individual works for you, then them successfully doing their job is your responsibility. So you pointing one finger at them is actually pointing three fingers at you because you haven't been following up with your team. You haven't been following up with your employees and making sure they're delivering the expectations that you set for them. If you even bothered to set those expectations. Because one thing I always say is I will never allow us to hold somebody accountable to something that is not in writing. Right? I should set expectations in writing that you can materially agree or disagree to, right? Words and writing have definitions. That's why there's a difference between verbal speech and written speech. They're held to a different standard, even legally, constitutionally. They're held to a different standard, right? So if I write something down, the expectations should be clear. And if you're not meeting those expectations, it's my job as a leader to say, hey, like, I need this by Friday. Is there going to be any issue with you getting it to me by Friday? Right? Or, if you get it to me by Thursday, I'd appreciate that. If Monday comes and then my boss is asking me for something that I should have gotten on Friday, and now on Monday, I'm having to check because someone had to remind me of why something wasn't delivered on Friday, I'm being a bad leader. I'm not supporting my team. People are people. We're humans. We're not robots. We don't program and run. We have families. We have kids. We have illness. We have distractions. We have a lot of things going on in our life that can distract us from the primary thing that we're trying to focus on or that we want to hit for the particular day. So we have to be mindful of that. We've got to reflect on those things, and we have to be delegating with trust and not deferring to other people so that we don't have to take the responsibility and we put the burden that we're being paid for. We're paid to carry this weight on our shoulders. We're paid to be the umbrella that provides coverage for our team. So like when you start deferring, it's like taking segments of the umbrella out. Right? Like it's like you've got an umbrella, but now it's just a wire frame and you're standing there and everyone's getting rained on because instead of delegating and empowering and entrusting the people who work for you, you started deferring. So you started removing those panels of protection because if something comes, you're going to say, oh no, I gave that to Sally. I gave that to Jessica. I gave that to John. I gave that to Roy. I gave that to Mark. And you're removing the cover. The point of you being the leader is so that people have one point of contact. If you're moving and letting them hit other people, it's your responsibility to lead your team. It's your responsibility to discipline your team. It's your responsibility to set expectations and build processes and build policies. That is your job. That is why you're being paid as the leader. Stop deferring to other people. Delegate with trust and hold people accountable. Write things down, set clear expectations, and stop moving out of the way when trouble comes and letting the trouble go directly to your people. Because if you move every time there's a problem, then what is the point of you existing? You're supposed to be there to be coverage. You're supposed to be there to be a barrier. You're supposed to be there to be that umbrella that stops things from rolling downhill. Because if everybody still winds up getting wet, you're a pretty useless umbrella. So that's my thing. This is a pet peeve of mine. So please, especially if you work for me, don't do it. If you work around me, don't do it. I will check you on it. Delegate, but delegation requires trust, and you still own the responsibility. Even if you've empowered somebody to act on your behalf, it is still your responsibility as the leader. Stop deferring to other people. Defer to, you can have those conversations like, hey man, like I assigned this to you, you didn't deliver, like I'm disappointed, and I'm going to hold you accountable to that internally. Publicly, it was your job to deliver as the leader, and if the deliverable wasn't ready, it was your fault. So own it publicly. Take responsibility publicly, right? But delegate to your people, trust them, empower them to make decisions, but make sure they know you well enough, right? So that they don't have to have fear of making a decision that you would disagree with. So this is the second to last one. We have one more leadership lab when we'll talk about when do you leave? When do you step down? When do you quit? When do you walk away? Even if even if everything metrics, right, would say things are successful. So thank you for joining us for the leadership lab. We got one more lesson coming up, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Thanks for sticking with us this long. But yeah, I'm Roy Dockery. This is the Savage Truth Network Leadership Lab. God bless y'all. Peace out.
Somebody pray for me, whether I seem like I'm well or